in Ukraine.
You even speak about an armistice. Why do you think this is the outcome that's most likely? Why is there no negotiating table, and you think that there might be an armistice? Who could take the first step in this case?
Well, we have to remember that in the Korean War, the first year saw many reverses in territorial advances, and then there was 2 years of stalemate from basically the last 2 years of the war until 1953. Here in Ukraine, we have not seen the end of reversals on the ground, so there has not been a real stalemate yet. There's 6 weeks essentially before the winter begins or the rain begins in Ukraine, and it'll be difficult for Ukraine to make major advances. I think in the next 6 weeks, it hopes to basically cut the Russian occupation forces in half and push much of Russian forces out of the country. An armistice really is not something that's in the cards for another at least 6 months to a year, if then. But if, again, the two sides are unable to achieve major territorial advances in that period of time, then yes, in 6 months to a year, I think we will see negotiations. The first step would probably be taken by outside countries pushing Ukraine and Russia to the table, China in the case of Russia, perhaps the United States in the case of Ukraine.
What event do you think might trigger negotiations and this armistice? You speak about 6 months, 1 year, but what event could happen then? Because the war seems determined to, both parts, the West also, seems determined to win the war.
Well, to be honest, it would not be an event, it would be a non-event. It would be the failure of a Ukrainian counteroffensive, as well as a failure of the Russians to seize any more territory in their attempts to perhaps expand their territory up around Kharkiv, or even their grander objectives to seize more of Ukraine's southern coast. So it's the failure of those efforts by both sides, in other words, a non-event, which would lead to an armistice. But as I said, at the moment, Ukraine is probably in a good position to possibly achieve some of its objectives in the next 6 weeks. So all talk of armistice is really in the future, far into the future of at least 6 months to a year.
Do you think that a lasting peace is better than a victory in this war?
Well, a lasting peace is difficult. I mean, if you ask the Koreans, they really don't have a lasting peace. There's considerable conflict between North and South Korea. The country remains divided, and an armistice was not a happy conclusion to that war. In the Ukrainian situation, I think the best situation, in my point of view, is for international law to prevail, and that would be, frankly, the ejection of Russian forces from Ukraine. But in terms of a sustainable solution, we have to get to a point in which both Ukraine and Russia are more or less satisfied, or should we say more or less dissatisfied in an equal way with the result, and are not tempted to try to change the status quo. I put the onus on Russia in this case because, of course, it is the invading party, and we have to ensure that Russia is not tempted to invade Ukraine again, and that it is secure behind its, established borders prior to the seizure of territory in 2014.